It is Friday, April 25th, 2025. I'm Heath Lambert, and the biggest story of the week is the death of Pope Francis.
Pope Francis has died. The 88-year-old pontiff passed away just hours after he surprised many by addressing the Easter Sunday crowd at St. Peter's. Thousands of people lining up to pay their respects to Pope Francis. His body was moved to St. Peter's Basilica in a solemn ceremony overnight.
It is a somber day here at the Vatican. The sun is setting behind me, where thousands of people have gathered to mourn the passing of Pope Francis. And we are just getting some breaking news now.
On Monday, April 21st, 2025, Pope Francis died after a long struggle with double pneumonia. The Pope's doctor at the Vatican announced that following appearances on Easter Sunday, the Pope slipped into a coma and ultimately succumbed to a stroke and irreversible heart failure. Speaking from the Vatican, Cardinal Kevin Farrell said, "Dearest brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father." Pope Francis was 88 years old. Francis was Pope for 12 years. He was elected to the papacy in 2013 in the highly unusual circumstance of the retirement rather than the death of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. Francis was the first Jesuit, the first Argentinian, and the first South American to serve as Pope. Catholics all over the world are currently in a 9-day period of mourning called Novum Dialis. The Pope's funeral will take place on Saturday, and following that, every Catholic cardinal over the age of 80 will meet in conclave in the Sistine Chapel to elect Francis's successor. When the selection of the next Pope happens, it is virtually guaranteed to be the biggest story of the week. This week, I want to emphasize the legacy of Francis's pontificate, specifically that he was a liberal pope following the papacies of two great conservative popes. This reality is not even controversial, but is freely admitted by liberal church leaders who admired his leadership and conservative church leaders who feared what he was accomplishing. The liberalism of Pope Francis ultimately affected no formal change in official Catholic teaching. The doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church is the same at the end of Francis's papacy as it was at the beginning. Francis's liberalizing influence came in the liberal church leaders he appointed and promoted, and in the conservative church leaders he removed or passed over for promotion. The most significant structural change Francis has left is a Catholicism populated by bishops, archbishops, and cardinals more in line with Francis's liberal leanings. This is particularly important for the College of Cardinals who will choose his successor. The most obvious manifestations of Francis's liberalism were all the statements he failed to make and all the defenses he refused to offer regarding traditional Roman Catholic teachings on matters like marriage and sexuality. During Francis's papacy, the nations were raging on matters of marital ethics and deviations from biblical sexuality. Pope Francis refused to defend the biblical teaching, refused to articulate Catholic moral teaching, and famously refused to pass judgment on matters of homosexuality. I speak to you as a Baptist pastor from the campus of a Baptist church, as a spiritual descendant of the Protestant Reformation. I am not a Roman Catholic. That does not mean I think what happens in Roman Catholicism is unimportant. In fact, there are lessons we all must learn from the leadership of Pope Francis. One central lesson has to do with Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1, which says, "We must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it." The author of Hebrews urges Christians to pay very careful attention to the teaching of the Word of God in order to avoid a crucial danger. That danger is drift. Rejection and abandonment of the truth of God hardly ever happen overnight in one giant leap. Departure from the truth most typically happens very slowly over a long period of time through a process called drift. And one of the very first phases of drift is the kind of failure to pay attention that remains silent when speaking is called for, or that refuses to defend the truth when that truth is unpopular. When the leader of 1.3 billion Catholics refuses to defend moral realities embraced for thousands of years, you can know for certain The drift has begun even before a single word is changed in the Catholic Catechism. The biblical command in Romans 12:15 to weep with those who weep means Christians should mourn with our Catholic friends who are experiencing real pain over the loss of an influential leader. May God have mercy on these precious people and comfort them in their grief. But the command to pay careful attention to what we have heard lest we drift from it should lead us also to pray that Roman Catholics can learn the lesson of drift before it's too late. Protestant Christians disagree with Roman Catholics on matters of tremendous significance, but we've always agreed on most matters of traditional biblical morality. In days when so much biblical morality is debated, the loss of clarity from Rome constitutes the loss of a crucial ally. We should pray that does not happen. That's the biggest story of this week. I can't wait to see you next Friday as we examine next week's biggest headline.